Good evening, Browns fans, and welcome to OBR Weekly with Fred Greetham. So far, there's no Fred, but he is on his way. He is, I don't believe he's at Fred Greetham home base, world headquarters in rural Ohio tonight. I think that he is traveling. He can give us an update when he gets here. So right now, you're stuck with some other guy. I am free to answer questions, but you got to keep them simple. But we are going to be here Fred's going to be here in short order. And we hope you can put up with me until he's able to make it here. But good evening and welcome to OBR Weekly nonetheless. And before we get into it, as always, the usual disclaimer. This show is powered by your comments and questions, so please contact us with your comments and questions in the YouTube and Twitch chat rooms, and give us something useful to discuss. Otherwise, you're stuck with whatever I want to talk about, which is generally horrible and boring. So, speaking of which, it's Mr. Fred Greetham. How you doing, Fred? Good to see you, buddy.
All right. Scrambling, but we're here.
All right, it's good to have you. Good to have you online. Good to have you online, buddy. I think our assembled crowd was afraid that they'd be stuck with me for a while. So let's see here. Gregory H says these guys are legends. Well, he is. That guy, he's a legend. I'm a web dork. Hit that like and subscribe. And Brad also says hit like and subscribe. So you have your instructions there, folks. Especially if you're on YouTube, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. And feel free to get on board with free Browns content year round. So, Fred, we got a couple things here to talk about. The silly season has begun. There is all kinds of misdirection and craziness happening. But before we get to that, Mel Kiper has come out with his first mock draft of the year, which I assume was behind a paywall, but everybody knows who he picks for the Browns. And that is Travis Hunter at pick number 2. And I had to stifle a little bit of a chuckle when I saw that because I guess he's kind of alone in picking Travis Hunter at number 2 for the Browns. Are you buying that at all? Do you think the Browns would take a quarterback / wide receiver at number 2?
I don't know if that's what they would do. I don't think so. But I do know that those are 2 premium positions that Andrew Berry values, wide receiver and cornerback. And if you can get 2 for the price of 1, why wouldn't you? But I do think in the corner or in the mock draft world, you can't really simulate trades. And everybody knows that quarterback is valued high. And so I think I think Hunter might be the number 1 player on his board. And it's getting to be a pretty common thought that Cam Ward's going to be the first pick, although the new general manager threw out a little bit of, question today saying that you can't pass up a generational talent like Hunter. But with that being said, I think that he probably will go in the first 2 picks. So if he had information that said Ward would go to the Titans, Hunter would go second, whether it's the Browns or not, they could choose to trade down. And, we really can't get into the heads of the decision makers, and they really shouldn't put information out there, and nor do they. So that's really why these mock drafts are so silly. I mean, in my opinion, I know everybody likes to look at them, but you get past 5. I don't know. I've never studied it, but I bet you for sure if you get past the top 10, it's almost impossible to be right because it starts a chain reaction. But a lot of times I don't even think you get past 5 and then it kind of gets all out of whack.
Yeah, I used to do this thing called the mock draft muncher where we would take all these mock drafts and sort of throw them in a blender and then go back and sort of analyze afterwards who was most correct. And it was almost random, who was the most accurate. One year I just sort of took a guess at the mock drafts and I turned out to be more accurate than Kuiper. And I don't know, diddly squat compared to him in terms of, what people are going to, who people are going to take and all that, admittedly.
Dirty little secret, Barry, is I think 900 of these guys out of 905 look at everybody else's, and if everybody's picking one guy, then they do it as well.
Yeah.
Or they just go totally, the opposite to try to get a reaction. Like, everybody look at this guy.
Exactly.
He said he knows something nobody else knows.
I spent years chronicling that being a mock draft muncher. Here goes the groupthink, and then here comes somebody to do something radically different to try to get attention. And so, yeah, you have cracked the code on the mock drafts, my friend. Fumble 13 always wondered if either of us have ever met Mel Kiper and whether he's a nice guy or standoffish. I've never met Mel. I feel free to slander him because he's rich and famous, but have you ever met Mel Kiper, Fred?
I haven't met him in person, I don't think, but in my former life, before the internet, there was a thing called Browns News Illustrated, and it was a tabloid. And one of my positions was to, like if somebody was advertising, to write a story about them, and as well as talk to Browns backers and so forth. Well, there's a guy who had this book who had real slick hair, and he was just getting started. This would have been like 1980s, named Mel Kiper. And so he called me and hyped me, to write his little article about this book he was putting out. Very plain, very plain looking draft guide, but nobody else was doing it back then. And he made the draft cool before it was cool. But he sold a lot of books through our publication to Browns fans. And, it's not a surprise that he's still doing it. This would be, close to 40 years ago.
So basically what you're saying, Fred, is that you made Mel Kiper and created this whole draft.
I wrote the story to sell him enough books to keep in business long enough before ESPN made him their guy.
Yeah. All right. So this is the man who created Mel Kiper and the whole draft cottage industry right here. That's why they call him the legend.
He was probably doing that with other publications, teams, I'm sure. But the Browns backers have always been, worldwide, one of the biggest groups. And so I'm sure he sold a lot of draft guides to Browns fans.
Yeah, I'm sure he did. We were fanatical about the draft then. As we are now. Now it's our Christmas, but back then even we were fascinated with it. But you made a mention too of the Titans GM saying that they will not pass on quote unquote a generational talent with the number 1 pick in the 2025 draft. And that has got a lot of people spinning their wheels now saying, oh, is he referring to Hunter? Is he referring to Abdul Carter? He may mean Cam Ward. I mean, who knows? But he's sort of doing the right thing, wouldn't he think, by the team in terms of creating intrigue around who the Titans will pick, thereby creating more interest perhaps in people trading for that number 1 pick?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if nobody knows, where he's at, I mean, he had a firsthand look at Patrick Mahomes and what he did for the franchise. And if he looks at Cam Ward and says, well, he's not close to that, or the other way says, yeah, I see, him developing that, you're not going to pass him up. Same way with Shedeur Sanders, but by the same token is you can do the same thing. They called Myles Garrett a generational talent, and he has been. but he was in that 2017 draft, and there was no talk of anybody taking anybody but Myles Garrett with number one,
Right.
and the Browns had the number one pick. Patrick Mahomes was in that draft class, and so was Deshaun Watson. But yeah, I think that nobody really knows. There was a lot of talk before that. Cam Ward was the guy they wanted. And then they fired the general manager. So I would assume that Brian Callahan really, that's kind of who he was leaning to. I haven't used the name, but I think his name's Ran Carthon. Maurice Carthon's son, was the general manager with the Titans. He got fired and replaced by this guy. I don't know if he's went somewhere else, but I think the Browns should hire him as a consultant and tap into that information. Like, okay, up until when you left, were they taking Cam Ward?
Right.
You were the guy in charge. So you would, I'm sure, I don't know why I wouldn't give out some of that information, but those are the type of things that happen now until the draft. There's a lot of misdirection. I don't know what you could do. Maybe what they're thinking is if the Browns really wanted Cam Ward for a hypothetical, because I don't know if you can go much lower than 2 or 3. If a team wanted to trade up, to get the number one pick to take Travis Hunter, would the Browns trade from 2 to 1 to get Ward, and then they take Hunter, number 2? I don't, so there's all kinds of gamesmanship going on. You really won't know, until we get close to it. In fact, I didn't really think the Winds were going with Baker Mayfield the year they took him up until almost like the day of the draft. Then all of a sudden, Adam Schefter started saying, it looks like Baker. And I'm like, what? I was even taken aback a little with that. And so that's kind of the job of the general manager, I guess. I don't know what you get out of it other than offers and different things. And then you can weigh them.
I would think if I was the Cleveland Browns right now, if you think the Titans are going to take Cam Ward at number 1, you start talking about how much you love Shadur Sanders, whether you do or not, right?
Yeah.
To get somebody who's interested in him, perhaps, the Raiders or somebody else interested in perhaps moving up to trade with you, someone who actually likes him more than we suspect that the Browns do. Just start hyping him up and how much you want to take him and how wonderful it would be for him to be in Cleveland, regardless of what Dion may think, and that sort of thing. But we'll see if the Browns are playing that game. And a little bit of what might be deception or deceit and lies coming from the Steelers, according to Andrew Filipponi today. He put out a tweet saying that there are Steelers scouts who love, in quotes, Alabama quarterback Jalen Milroe, believe he's a first-round talent and a potential franchise quarterback. And that puts a little bit of pressure on the Browns, don't you think, to trade back and grab him before the evil Steelers might grab him? Just a little subplot now that the Steelers might have an interest in Milroe. At the same time, and snag him before he might be available in the second round. But then again, they're the Steelers. Maybe they're plotting that to try to goad the Browns into taking them. But are you surprised to hear that name in the first round there, Fred?
Yeah, nothing surprised me. I expect, Anthony Richardson shot up the board because of the workouts at the combine, and I expect that to happen with Milroe. I mean, when a guy, if he runs a 4.4 and, you're going to be compared to Lamar Jackson, and is he closer to Lamar Jackson or Anthony Richardson? And so that's a lot of the, they don't call it the silly season for a reason, and the thing is with free agency and the trades and the league year starting in mid-March, a lot of teams will show their hand. And like, if the Steelers absolutely don't do anything, If they let Wilson and Fields go and they don't bring in a quarterback, well, then okay. But I expect they'll re-sign Wilson or Fields, and you'll kind of have a general direction. Well, then they feel like they could go that way. But again, why would a team, let that out? I mean, other than just want people to get thinking and worried and all this kind of stuff. I think the Browns got to do what they got to do. And regardless of how they think about the quarterbacks in the draft, my approach for the Browns is go all in like you can't get anybody in the draft. Go all in as in a trade or in free agency to get a starting quarterback, whatever you got to do. And if you get to the draft and the guy you want's there, great. You take him anyway. But because any of the free agents or trade guys are all going to be aged or something wrong with them, haven't done it yet. So I just think you got to put all your eggs in getting a quarterback and making sure you don't get to the draft and you got to settle for whatever's left. If you really wanted Ward and he's taken and you didn't want the other guys, well, you don't just take them to take them. But if you really like Milroe and you have him somewhere and, at the end of the first round, then you go back and you trade up, to try to do that type thing. But I just don't think you want to be in that position. I think you want to get the quarterback settled as much as you can in free agency, or what I keep suggesting is through a trade, because the trade is the best way to assure that you get the guy instead of them going to another team.
Right. Okay. Well, I tell you what, we've got some questions that are piling up here, and I will start getting to those here in just a minute. But I do want to talk to you about an article that you wrote about the running backs, which appeared on the site. And so let's talk running backs here for just a second before we get back into the draft and the quarterback and all that sort of stuff. You talked about how few running backs are actually signed on the roster for this next year. It's just Foreman and Strong. Is that right? Are the only running backs who have contracts in the next year? Is that correct?
Ford and Strong.
I'm sorry, Ford.
Foreman was a 1-year free agent. I'm sure he's one and done.
Yeah.
But, you only have 2 under contract as we speak. I think it was like that last year. I think you had Chubb and Ford.
Right.
Might have had Strong.
So you don't think that Foreman's going to come back, but obviously Chubb is a guy that you think maybe an incentive-laden contract brings him back, then you'd have 3 in the running back room?
I think he wants to come back. I think that he's not going to have much of a market elsewhere. I think the Browns would offer him as much as anybody else would.
Right.
My approach would be try to get, I don't know about free agency. There's a couple out there like J.K. Dobbins. I mentioned him last year. It didn't seem like they were interested. They let him go late and he went to the Chargers. Derrick Henry, they didn't sniff at him, to my knowledge. So I see what would probably happen would be the draft seems to be what Andrew Berry likes to add running backs. I've said this before. If Andrew Berry was in charge of the draft the year Chubb was in 2018, I don't think he would have used a pick that high on Nick Chubb.
Right.
They love him, but I think he's more in the arena of the Jerome Ford, the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th round. Get your running backs, maybe get 3 of them, and just let them sort themselves out. So I think Ford would be a returnee, and I think Chubb, but I don't think you can count on him. I don't know how you can really test him in the offseason to see, if he's, I guess you can test time and stuff, but I mean, a guy's usually better in the second year. So that's kind of what you're counting on. But then you got the double-edged sword that he's 29, and that's when you usually start looking to move on. It's hard for me to believe that when he wants to finish his career here, that he could at least be a third back,
Right.
with a reasonable incentive laden contract. If there's a guy you can trade for, like there's Damian Pierce, guy like that, or somebody you can get in the draft. It seems to be a very deep year for draft. And if you could get a starting caliber running back in the third or fourth round, that can step right in and play. And even if Chubb plays, he's probably in the last year or two, I would think, seriously. And so you probably want to get new youth into it. I don't necessarily think they're going to draft a running back in the first or second round, but I could see him maybe in the third round, quit trying to always take a wide receiver and maybe get a running back.
Right. Right. You did mention Aaron Jones and J.K. Dobbins in your article. Could you see him chasing either one of those guys, or do you think that they've got enough veterans on the roster, assuming they add Chubb?
They don't seem to be really free agent oriented when it comes to running back.
Right.
Like, I haven't really heard them being connected in the past few years. He seems to have premium positions that he goes after in free agency and in trades. So, yeah, if there's a guy under contract with another team that you can trade for, that's what I think Andrew Berry's been best at, is trading, taking guys that maybe have big contracts that a team's already ready to move on from, because you're just spending Jimmy Haslam's money and they know how to restructure it. So you don't have to be as great of a evaluator of talent when you trade for a guy that's already been there on another team. So, but I think realistic approach. Yeah, Aaron Jones, I don't know if Minnesota would let him go, but if he does, you're still a month from free agency and a lot of things happen. You don't know really how it's going to shake out. I don't think there's a lot of big names out there in free agency. Running backs just haven't been sought after. I mean, again, Derrick Henry, I don't know if he got an offer from anybody but the Ravens last year. And what did he do? Rush for about 2,000 yards. So that's the thing about the running back position. I do think, and you see what Saquon Barkley did, after kind of you saw what everybody thought when he come out of the draft. He was exciting and big time, but you put him in the right place and he elevated that team. I do think if the Browns commit back to the run, they really, they can say what they want. Personally, I think a big time running back makes a big difference. Just getting 3 or 4 guys and just rotating them and hoping somebody does all right. That's good for the injury front. But, I think that if you have a guy that you can give the ball to, it helps your quarterback out a lot. Just see what it did for Lamar Jackson, see what it did for Jalen Hurts, with those guys. So I don't know. I don't see, a guy that would be a blockbuster in free agency, but I thought Dobbins and Jones are starting caliber, really good running backs. And there's not that many right now going into free agency. Now, I don't know about trade, people under contract, that teams that have a lot of depth at running back.
Right. Well, as Amatora says here, all the best offenses have great running games, and that's certainly true, especially if the Browns want to go wide zone, get the quarterback under center a little bit, get some play action. You got to take the running game seriously. One of the ways to do that, maybe, Fumble 13. Now, I highlight Fumble 13's comments because he makes a lot of sense here, and he makes a lot of sense because he's saying take this OSU player at 67, and I'm an OSU honk, fresh off a national championship, so I'm, of course, going to put this up on screen. but Travion is a very complete running back. Although our video producer is convinced that I'm supporting the wrong Ohio State running back as a third-round pick, but either of those guys would be interesting. Jeffrey, again, plugging Damian Pierce. He says, Nick Chubb, Damian Pierce, and Cam Skataboo is my dream running back room. That would be very intriguing. That would be very intriguing, Jeffrey. But
yeah, the Skataboo guy came across my radar. One of those games, I think the Arizona State was playing to get into the playoff, and he reminded me of Peyton Hillis. He was just like a bowling ball. He's just running over those guys. And I thought, there's a guy that would fit in well on the North Coast. And yeah, if you could get him, in one of those rounds, that would be, I think, a great scenario. Like I said, there's a lot of them available. I thought both the Buckeye running backs, I like Henderson a lot. I like that Judkins a lot too. So, I think you have a bunch of picks this year. This is the year to use them and supplement some of your areas. But I think if you went in the third round, I think 33 is too high. But if you trade down and you get extra pick, or even what you have, like he said, 67, that's top of the third round. So, that would be, I think you'd be in good shape to get a good player there.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, Nick Chubb right now probably in the weight room lifting the equivalent of a semi-tractor trailer. He would make Core Home Fitness. He'd take those adjustable dumbbells from Core Home Fitness and juggle them like juggling balls. That guy pushes so much weight. But if you are not Nick Chubb, you might want to check out corehomefitness.com, work out a little bit with the top-rated adjustable dumbbells on the market per New York Times Men's Health Best Buy by Consumer Reports. You've heard me tell you this a dozen times. But go to corehomefitness.com, check out their fitness videos, check out all their equipment. These guys know absolutely what they're doing. They are the leaders in this particular marketplace. They make the best equipment. They make the holders for the barbells. They make incline benches. They make all this sort of stuff. They've got a U.S.-based support team, fast shipping, hassle-free returns. They know what they're doing. Plus, the icing on the cake is these guys are big supporters of the OBR. They help underwrite these video programs that we do 5 days a week, 6 days a week during the season. And they help keep us running here at the OBR with these video programs. So please check out corehomefitness.com. They support us. We support them. And they make a product that we can be proud of supporting here at the OBR. So corehomefitness.com. All right. So let's go back to the questions in the chat room. Rocky Balboa says Kirk Herbstreit is and Mika Ibuka says Mika Ibuka is Terry McLaurin 2.0. Should we trade back and take Ibuka? I tell you what, man. Every mock draft I see has either the Ravens or Steelers taking this guy. It's just I hate to see another great Ohio State wide receiver playing elsewhere in the AFC North. I don't think he's the top wide receiver in the draft, but boy, is he dependable. And I'd hate to see him wind up somewhere else in the AFC North. And what do you think about this player, Fred? I'd love to see him trade up to get him, not so much trade back to get him, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good players. There's, I think I mentioned 5 or 6 wide receivers and doing a wide receiver story for Friday. Most is a first round. I think the Browns have other needs. If you trade down, I mean, I think it could be the best thing for them, but I don't want them to trade down too far because if there's a blue chip player in the top. I don't know how many there are. If they think there's 5 of them or 4 of them or 6 of them, whatever, you want to get one of those blue chip players. I know Ibuka is a first round player, but I don't think he would be in that. He's not the top wide receiver.
No.
If they feel really wide receivers the game changer, there's some right at the top of the draft. But I'd be happy with him. I just think you need several areas, and I would rather get if you can get Abdul Carter and Ibuka, and you can solve 3 or 4 problems, by trading down a couple spots, yeah, I'm all for that. But I just don't. I get carried, it's kind of like you. The one sport I watch football as a fan is Ohio State. So there's a lot of Ohio State guys I like. And I hate when they end up with the Steelers for years. The Santonio Holmes, the Cam Hayward, on it, Ryan Shazier, and then you're like, same. Now the Ravens are doing it. They did it with Dobbins and right down. That's what happens when you got good players and you're a national champion. But at least Andrew Berry's starting to open up that pipeline with Ohio State. Most of his guys have been linemen, and we haven't really seen, a lot of the skill position guys. But yeah, I think it's time to add a running back and a wide receiver from there if you can do it.
Yeah, it would be wonderful to add him to the room, but the Browns have so many needs that I can't see it happening. But where do things have happened? He's certainly a great player. I think I'm doing a pretty good job, Fred, of not belaboring Ohio State's national championship victory. I could go on and on about it, but I'm trying to keep myself under control here.
Little sidebar on that. Don't you just watch? Now, that was a little different because it was the national championship. But when you watch the game, so much different than the Browns, even as a fan, I would imagine, because pretty much they're going to win. Like almost every week, there's a game or two. I'm not talking playoffs. I'm talking about regular season. It's just, is it going to be 49-7 or 49-10, And, it's then you have the clunker. But Browns, you don't know what you're going to get in recent years. So anyway, that's the one thing that's kind of nice, consistency. They're going to win. So I think that was tremendous. And I said this, I tweeted, I said the best thing that happened to the Buckeyes, you hate to say it, but losing to Michigan just turned their season around. They all came together, and I mean, they got railroaded in that bracket. When I first saw it, you got to beat Tennessee, which is a ranked high team, and then you had to beat Oregon, the number 1 ranked team in the country. Then you had to beat Texas, the number 2 ranked team in the nation, and then Notre Dame. So compare
that to the path that Penn State was following, playing Boise State and all that. The Buckeyes certainly earned it. But we're here to talk Browns, so I will not go on and on and on ad nauseum about it. Instead, we'll answer this question from Amatora. He said, a question for both Fred and Barry. Who is at the top of your draft board? Who is your number 1 prospect in this draft? So we'll go to you first, Fred. Who is the guy you want the most if you had pick number 1?
Well, I don't know if he's the best player, but from what I gather, I still like Cam Ward. I mean, I think that because I'm more of a need. The Browns need a quarterback, and that might change. Like I said, if they go all in and can find a trade, like they did a couple years ago, and make a move to find that veteran quarterback in a trade or free agency, okay. But if they were relying on the draft right now for a player that had to come in this year to play, it seems to me Cam Ward has played the most games, and he has gotten better every year. And by all accounts that I've read and researched on, he's ranked higher. I know Shadur Sanders is supposed to be better in the Stefanski type system, but I don't know. I just feel like I'm reading between the lines that Dion doesn't want him to go there and they're going to throw a stink.
Mhm.
I don't think that would bother the Browns. I think if they feel he's the guy, they'll draft him. So I'm saying as we're sitting here, I haven't been to the combine, haven't really done a lot of draft work. Most of it's free agency and potential trades right now because that comes first. But
Right.
I'm saying Cam Ward still who I would draft if I had the first pick in the draft.
From my reading, not my tape watching, I'm not going to pretend that I'm sitting here watching film all the time. I'm not convinced Cam Ward is the guy. I'll name my guy, but with an asterisk that if Kevin Stefanski loves Cam Ward, then by all means take him at number one if he's convinced that he's the guy. But after watching these playoffs and the effect that the rush had for the Los Angeles Rams and the Houston Texans, granted neither of them are still in the playoffs, but the impact that they had with their rushing game, with their defensive rush, I've got Abdul Carter at the top of my list. I think pairing him with Myles Garrett right now would create a pass rush that would be very, very difficult to fight against and would really impact the games and would make the Cleveland Browns a nightmare for opponents. And I just think he's a very impactful player. And granted, I'm a Big Ten guy, and so I've seen him a lot of them. So I'm a little bit biased at this point, but he's my guy unless Stefanski's in love with Ward, in which case I would definitely say take Cam Ward.
I get
But,
what you're saying, and that's who I would say if I was going to say that the best player, available. But if you were looking back in hindsight in 2017, who would you take with the number one pick?
Yeah, I know. You got a great point there. I mean, 2020 hindsight. I mean, it's obvious. You take Mahomes, right? As great as Myles Garrett is, because Mahomes is the guy who can take you to the Super Bowl, and Garrett, quarterbacks greater than edge rushers. We know that in terms of the
And
impact that
that's
they
the
can
thing
have
that
on wins and
bothers.
losses.
That's the thing that bothers you is that by all accounts, this isn't the quarterback group. You only need one, but I don't even
Right.
know if any of these are that guy, and so you just don't take one to take one, but you can't afford to just say, well, let's wait till 2026 and hope we get one next year, because unless you want to have another 3-14 season, you're not going to have a chance, to do that. So I'm almost, the idea. That's why I said that. If you're convinced, if you're not, then you do the trade down and you make sure you still get Abdul Carter or whoever you have, but you don't trade far enough down where you get a good player, but you don't get a blue chip, top guy at his position.
Yeah. I can certainly see that. All right. Question from Gregory H. If we were to trade back, what two journeyman quarterback would you like to see compete, and what rookie would you sit behind them? So this is assuming that Ward or Sanders does not make the team. Nobody that you would start immediately. Maybe you get a developmental guy and you play it out with a couple of journeyman quarterbacks. So who would you want to see fight it out?
Well, I've written about this. I think what Andrew Berry's done best is trades, other than the biggest one he ever made. But I don't want him to be gun shy. I want him to go out and see if there's somebody that they could pry away from another team that can come in and play at a high level. And right now, there's two I've identified. Geno Smith from the Seahawks. And I don't know if they'll decide to move on from him, but he has a $16 million roster bonus due in March, and he would want a new contract. He's 35 for this coming season, but Andrew Berry's been very good in those situations. If you could trade for him, he's got a $31 million contract, 1 year left. They would immediately restructure him, so that wouldn't be a problem. They'd probably, do what they did with Amari Cooper and so forth, but it wouldn't cost much other than money. And we know Jimmy Haslam has allowed Andrew Berry to spend the money. So that to me, or the other one's a little trickier, Derek Carr. Derek Carr would be my number one choice, but I don't know all the ins and outs of the salary cap. I've heard that there's a lot of dead money, if the Saints trade him. They would have to do something like a restructure, and work that out. If that's available, I would trade, or if he is released, acquire Derek Carr. But he's got a no trade clause. So if you could make it all work out, Derek Carr, Geno Smith would be my first two, because you can win now immediately with both those guys. I mean, then there's the free agent stuff, Nobody at this time last year thought Sam Darnold was worth anything, and look what he did. There's guys maybe on that free agent list that haven't done anything, the Zach Wilsons, whatever, that could. But that, to me, is a big risk. So I want somebody that's been there, done that, and to me, Derek Carr or Geno Smith. Third one would be Kirk Cousins. He's expected to get released. That's another guy that I think you could win with, at least next year, and be competitive. Somebody that can run the system and is used to Stefanski's, approach. So any one of them wouldn't preclude me from drafting a quarterback, anywhere. It'd be better for the Jalen Milroe thing, because then he's just being able to develop and be on the bench, hopefully, as opposed to have to play immediately.
Yeah. Well, there'll be tons of pressure to see him play, of course, but that would be the preferable option. Derek Carr, of course, is the most interesting of those potential options to me as well. Things can work out financially. So I think we are in the same camp there. In terms of who we would like to see. Rocky Balboa asks, is Will Howard a realistic option? So what did you think about the Ohio State quarterback? I know that now that he's won the national championship and he's an Ohio State player, there will be perhaps more emphasis on him than there should be in the city of Cleveland or in the state of Ohio. He'll get a lot of hype here locally, but do you think the hype is justified, Fred? Do you think that the Browns should really take a look at this kid?
Oh, not really. I mean, it's a good story, but I don't think he's. You could have asked me after that first Oregon game when he went and he's diving on the ground and let the clock run. Well, what's this guy doing? And then the Michigan game, those interceptions. But he really rose up the board in the most critical games. Obviously, in that championship game, I think he was MVP. But I don't look at him as an NFL, top of the list prospect. I mean, he's got size and all that. I don't think he's got the biggest arm, but if you want to take him, down the road as a developmental prospect. But if you're asking me, I'm the wrong guy. I want a sure shot, as much as you can get. And, I want the Joe Burrow. I want the Andrew Luck, the guy that is going to be good. Everybody knew they were going to be good. And that's what bothers me about Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward, is that there's too much cloud around them,
Right.
Last year, everybody's, and it turned out the number 2 one, Jaden Daniels. I didn't follow it that closely because the Browns weren't looking for a quarterback, but I never got the idea that this guy was as good as he has turned out to be. So, but Will Howard, I don't even know where he's projected. I would think he might be a 4th, 5th, 6th round pick, but I don't think that's going to get you, the franchise quarterback. I could be wrong. The Browns have drafted too many of them guys over the years. I want a guy at the top of the draft, that, is going to be ready to go sooner than later. And that's where maybe the Milrow, if you could get a Geno Smith or you could get, a Derek Carr, then you could spend a year or two with a Milrow, developing. If you don't think Ward or Sanders are the guy, but if you think either of those guys are, you take one of them. If they're there at number 2.
Right. Yeah, Will Howard again. Great story, like you said, Fred. And he did make some throws into tight coverage during this playoff run. I mean, there were some very impressive moments from him. He's a big.
He did have some. He had like 3 number 1 NFL draft choice wide receivers and
2 great running backs and a great defense, and he had a lot of stuff going for him. That's for sure. Question from Dean Bowditch, looking forward to 2025, or maybe not looking forward to 2025, as the case may be. Ask, will Stefanski be on the hot seat or fired if this team starts off slow at like 1-5 or worse? God forbid. Or does Haslam let him die a slow death? Looking forward to that possibility, Fred. Put yourself in the shoes of Jimmy Haslam trying to build a dome. How do you think you handle that sort of situation?
Oh, if that starts, I think he'll fire him. I think, they didn't want to make a move this year when teams with worse records or better records made moves. I think he's really given them a lot of benefit of the doubt. This is a big draft, a big off season. I expect them to make a lot of moves. If they make a lot of moves and none of it work, then, I don't know where else you go. Are you just going to keep riding this horse?
Yeah, very, very, very difficult. Hopefully we're not in that position. Question from Kelly Black: is there movement toward dual quarterbacks? I think this means running quarterbacks, because the quarterbacks left in the playoffs, Mahomes, Daniels, Hurts, and Allen, all guys who can certainly run the ball. So that's my interpretation of the question. Let me know in chat if I interpreted it wrong, Kelly. Appreciate it. So do you think that if the Browns draft a quarterback, this quarterback better be able to run the ball, Fred?
Well, I know they like that. I mean, that's why they traded for Deshaun Watson. That was the whole idea of shifting into this offense. This isn't the way Kevin Stefanski, learned. And I think there's been a lot of talk that he's going to go back to his offense. I don't know if he's completely going to do that or not. I read between the lines that with Tommy Rees and himself, they're going to put something together, maybe a hybrid of, the best of both worlds. But, you go back to what's left in the play. That is the nature of the college game now. And that is so what the quarterbacks are coming out of college, that way. I think more so, you mentioned the Final Four quarterbacks. I think the final 8, 7 of the 8 were first round picks or top of the draft picks. And that's what I'm talking about. That's where you get the franchise quarterbacks, Yeah, you can miss on them. But as far as the dual role, I mean, there's no question being able to run and being able to do that when these guys are big and fast on defense, it makes all the difference in the world. And that's where you can see the Jalen Milrow, the interest there, because if he has a 4.4, and is that athletic, he just, I've always had a problem with Lamar Jackson since he came out, that he was a runner. He wasn't that much of a thrower, but now in his 7th year, he's now seems to have got the throwing down, and now he's so dangerous because he can do both. But yeah, I mean, I think that's going to continue to be the trend because that's what these college players are doing. is they are, dual threat. They can run and they can throw.
Now, Chef Brian K makes I think a valid comment here. He said the Patriots reached on a maybe QB in 2000 at 199. How'd that work out? Referring, of course, to Tom Brady. And Brock Purdy, of course, Mr. Irrelevant, right? So there is a school of thought, Fred, that, hey, just year after year, keep taking a shot at somebody on day 3, quarterback day 3. Sooner or later, maybe you'll luck out, right? Maybe you'll get a hit, right? The counterpoint to that, of course, is every quarterback that the Browns have drafted since 1999, right? Same thing with Sam Darnold, right? Well, you can take a shot at this free agent quarterback. Maybe it'll be, maybe he'll turn out to have a year like Sam Darnold had. Counterpoint to that is Trent Dilfer, Jeff Garcia, and every other quarterback that the Cleveland Browns have signed since 1999. It just seems to have not worked out for us. But do you like the theory that, hey, take a day 3 quarterback every year, sooner or later, maybe one will work out if you put him in the right environment?
Yeah, and so you're not forcing it. What they were doing was taking guys, in the first round and they weren't ready to play and they threw them out there. They were taking guys in the 4th round and they were throwing them out there, 3rd round, 5th round, and generally there's a reason they're available. The Tom Brady, I mean, he might have never got to play if Drew Bledsoe wouldn't have got hurt. And that's,
Right.
It's the same thing with Lou Gehrig and all kinds of stories. The same thing with Brock Purdy. I think Garoppolo was the quarterback, got hurt, and they had no choice, and yeah, there's all these guys have talent. It's developing. The Browns have not been good at developing because they haven't had the top of the line quarterback. So they're throwing them out there before they're ready, and they get look at DTR. Everybody's like, well, develop him. I've saw him now for 3 years in practice. He's a good kid. I think his best position might be wide receiver, not quarterback. And,
Right.
And so how much do you need to see of him? And I think the system is a big thing. The Browns have messed around with their systems and that's what we talked about on here. Kevin Stefanski needs to get a quarterback that fits what he wants to do and run it. And
Right.
you can plug in another guy, if he gets hurt. And so, yeah, I think it was Mike Holmgren always said, draft a quarterback every year, somewhere. I don't care, because in the Browns case, maybe they should take 9 quarterbacks this year and hope one of them's good, because it just hasn't worked out the way they've done it. And
Right.
we all know the reason these teams are at the top are still playing this weekend because of their quarterback play.
Right.
Sure, they got defenses. Sure, they got other players. But you got to have elite quarterback play, and I don't mean hero ball. I mean just no mistakes, limited mistakes, and run a great offense and put points on the board. And that's what's so frustrating, for the Browns and their fans, is that we haven't seen that other than with one guy for a short time.
Exactly. Question from Kelly Black. What should the free agency period need to look like for the Browns to go best player available? That's an interesting question. Very active, I think would be my short response. But what's your thoughts on that, Fred?
Are you talking about in the draft?
Yeah, go best player available in the draft.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, I would feel a lot better with a lockdown cornerback, with a lockdown edge rusher, a defensive tackle on defense. I feel like the quickest way to get right is to get your defense, and if you could solve that in free agency, they've spent the money on 2 safeties. At the time, I thought both were good hits, John Johnson and Juan Thornhill, and both have got the money, but they didn't produce. I don't know. It just depends on the premium positions or the money positions, and I don't know if you're going to go spend the money to get T. Higgins. It's going to be a bidding war.
Right.
And so, yeah, you can solve your problems to some degree, but you can't solve them all. I would just think that to get the best player available in their mind, I think you have to solve a few positions. You got to determine DeJuan Jones. Do you use that on a left tackle? Do you use it on a running back, on another wide receiver, quarterback? I think quarterback, if you could come out of free agency with a trade at the beginning of the year or in free agency and solve the quarterback position, at least in your mind, I think you could go about best player available. There's a lot to like about Hunter. If he can do both ways, you can solve your cornerback position opposite Ward, and you can also put him in on offense 15, 20 plays, maybe be a game-changing wide receiver in certain situations. So I could make that argument. I could do the Abdul Carter, have a dominant pass rush. I could do the Mason Graham, have a dominant, run stopping, rushing defense. But you got to solve the quarterback position overall first, I think.
It seemed like a year or two ago, Fred, we were sitting here going, boy, the Browns really, are in a position to take best player available because their, starting lineups on both offense and defense are pretty much set. I look at it now and I'm thinking, what position is so set that you don't have to think about it in the draft, right? I mean, where on the offensive line is so set that you don't have to think about taking a tackle, guard, or center,
when you're 3 and 14, you question everything, And
exactly.
When you're 11 and 6, you thought these were all good players and you were set. You didn't really change much, but now you look at it and say, I guess they weren't as good as you thought they were. I do think the edge rusher's big because even Jim Schwartz said the defense fell off after he left. He wasn't complaining, but until the end of the year, some of them young guys, it took them a while to get going. So, yeah, they have a lot of areas. What can get the most impact? What rookie at number 2 or even 33 can come in and start and help you right now? So many times these rookies don't make an impact for a while. It takes them a while to figure it out.
Yeah, there's not a lot of positions where a guy can, that's one of the things I like about Carter. I think an edge rusher can come in and make a really quick impact. I take that back, though. One position I think that we're absolutely set at is punter. So we don't need to worry about punter on day 1 or day 2, for sure. Mahorquez has got it locked down, my friend.
Unfortunately, that's been the story since the team returned. You can go back. The MVP was almost every year a punter. Gardaki and Zastadil, and year after year. Colquitt.
Yeah, we've had quite a few good ones coming through here. Dean Bowditch writes in with a comment. He says, "Hey Fred, Geno Smith and Derek Carr aren't coming to a place where you die a slow, miserable death. It's Derek Jones or Kirk Cousins or Garoppolo." Well, that's why you were talking trade, Fred. Don't give them a choice. Force them to come to a place where they die a slow, miserable death.
I don't think Geno Smith has a no trade clause, but Derek Carr does. But yeah, I mean, that's the idea. I mean, when you get to free agency, you get into a bidding war. You might think you're the sly one going after one particular person, and all it takes is one other one, and then it gets crazy. We've seen that in the last couple of years at defensive tackle. We heard the Browns were in on a big name, and then they end up going, to the Raiders, or they go to the 49ers or something like that. So, yeah, I mean, you just got to keep swinging the bat until you can hit a home run. You got to get somebody that can, what I was saying, the Steelers tailed off, but they really just got a quarterback that kept them in games, and they relied on their defense and special teams. And if you can, I'm pretty confident that Jim Schwartz can identify, and they can fix the defense quicker than maybe some of the problems on offense. And so if you can get the defense back to being a top 10, top 12 and keep you in games, then I think you ought to be able to put together an offense, because let's face it, that offense was historically bad. 15 points a game, you'd probably lose all your high school games, if you were scoring 15 a game. So,
Oh, absolutely.
That's what they get, the defense fixed however you can in free agency, and then offense, draft and supplement with like I said, trades and free agents.
Yeah, and reboot that quarterback room. And that is about it, my friends, for OBR Weekly for this Wednesday night. We will be back again next Wednesday at 7 o'clock to talk Cleveland Browns and whatever action has happened between now and then. I'm sure there will be plenty more lies and deceit and deception for us to talk about when it comes to the draft. And lots of rumors, maybe some coaching changes, all kinds of stuff like that to talk about over the course of the next week. So we will be here. Thank you as always, Fred. Appreciate it, my friend. And thank you, everyone in the chat room, for your comments and questions. You can make the show what it is. And so we will see you all again next Wednesday, 7 o'clock. See you then.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for checking it out.